This morning, I'd like to take a moment of privilege and a little extra time to share with you what I believe is a unique opportunity for Govans to grow our ministry and our mission into 2021 and beyond. So let's review some history first. In December 2017, Govans and Brown Memorial Woodbrook Presbyterian churches merged. We combined our member resources and our financial resources to create a more secure, healthy, thriving church. And it's been such a beautiful experience. Beyond the financial benefits of the merge, which we were all very excited about, we found the two congregations just complemented each other so well in so many ways. Perhaps most importantly, that people really just like each other from the two congregations and have gotten along really well. Now, yes, the money was important. When the merged church sold the Brown Memorial Woodbrook building and combined each church's previous endowments, we suddenly had a budget surplus generated in part by an endowment that was now worth about $6.5 million. It wasn't a huge surplus because both churches had been operating with annual budget deficits before the merge, so we had to fill the holes that we had dug before we could build anything new. But when all the dust had settled, we had enough to invest in new and stronger ministry. One investment was in our music programs, so that we were able to attract first Debbie Lewis as our second service music director, then Leah Gilmore as our first service music director, and now Mary Hamlin Spencer to replace Debbie, who retired earlier this year. I think it's very fair to say we have all seen the benefits in those investments as these gifted music leaders improved and continue to improve the quality of our music programming. Leah, in particular, has brought a new energy and vitality to our ministry that really far exceeds anything we could have expected or asked. In addition to Music Mondays, which have brought more new faces into the church than any other ministry besides maybe Soul Kitchen, Leah served as our transitional worship leader at the beginning of the year, and she co-led with me our first anti-racism book study that included about 30 participants every week. And that's not even to mention the fact that people in the congregation regularly reach out to Leah for support and encouragement. We also had enough after the merge to create a half-time associate pastor position. The position focuses on youth and young families, worship leadership, and something we call member engagement. We learned from a congregational assessment process that some people in the church were feeling overwhelmed by church commitments, and some people were feeling underutilized. And so part of the position includes using one-to-one relational meetings to find ways for each member to get involved in a way that is meaningful for them. Now, I admit, as we began this search for that position, I worried. I worried that we would not be able to attract a really qualified candidate for a half-time position. We were requiring a Master's of Divinity and ordination in the PCUSA. So creating this position was in some ways a leap of faith. And then to find somebody like Billy Klutz, who has 2 master's degrees and an ordained PCUSA minister, was just incredibly fortunate. It was a gift. Beyond his training and education, now we've all seen that Billy is a gifted pastor, preacher, and teacher. He's also gone above and beyond in his own position with improving our social media and digital presence, which are so essential, not just during the pandemic, but especially during the pandemic. So that brings us to the unique opportunity for Govans. This opportunity comes to us at a time like no other we have faced as a church or as a society. And like a gift from God, we have 2 people in Leah and Billy who are exceptionally qualified to help us respond to this moment in time. I've been a PCUSA pastor for 20 years now, and for many years in the church before that. That includes working personally with a lot of church staff across the country. And I know from those experiences that the kind of combined talent that we have in Leah and Billy is very rare for any church of any size. And that we have been gifted with both these individuals serving in part-time positions is really just amazing. Beyond their gifts and skills, this is especially important. They both fit in here at Govans, which is not necessarily easy. Govans is not a typical Christian church. We are a wonderfully unique mix of theologically and socially progressive, biblically grounded, racially diverse people who are unapologetically Christian. A large percentage of our congregation is highly educated, socially engaged, and independent thinkers from a variety of backgrounds and professions. It's not easy to find people who can effectively challenge and lead this group. Billy and Leah have proven in a very short time they have the skills and gifts to move our unique congregation forward. So I've talked about the people who've opened this window for us. Let me share a little bit about the proposal and what is possible for us. To say we're in unprecedented times has become cliche, but really, how else do you describe it? We're faced with a global pandemic that has simultaneously isolated millions of people and pushed millions of people online, whether for work or school or church or any number of other programs and needs. Now, not everyone's online, but not everyone's working from home or learning from home, but everyone in some way is turning more and more to the virtual world for some basic human interactions. If you're on this call, you're doing that right now. At the same time that happened, issues of racial justice have risen to the forefront of our national attention. It started with yet more videos and stories of police brutality, and it's really grown into a groundswell of racial justice work at every level of our society. And really, even if our nation's short attention span were to move on from racial justice, which is entirely possible, we as a church cannot. We cannot unsee what we have seen. We cannot unfeel what we have felt. We cannot leave our Black and brown brothers and sisters behind again. I've shared with you before my vision for this congregation, and I believe it's shared with many, many in the congregation, a vision of a growing, thriving, multiracial, multicultural, cross-generational, theologically and socially progressive church. Not only with that vision in particular at any place and any time, but I believe as a congregation in Baltimore City, on the fault line of economic and racial disparity and justice, we in particular cannot continue with integrity if we don't do everything we can to become more racially diverse, to work towards racial justice in our community. If we're not using all of the gifts that God has given us at this time and in this place to work toward that goal, what are we doing? So you may have guessed at this point that the essence of this proposal is staffing. I want to share 2 job descriptions with you. I shared these with Session on Tuesday. I think it's fair to say that they had a lot of enthusiasm for these, but there was also concern about the cost, which I will also address in a moment. These positions would be filled by Leah and Billy respectively. They were designed with these 2 people in mind and in consultation with them. So let's start with Leah's proposal. This is where I'll share my screen. The working title of this proposal, of this position, is Minister for Racial Justice and Multicultural Engagement. This position would provide expertise and leadership for assuring that Govans Presbyterian's commitment to being a diverse, welcoming, anti-racist, equitable, inclusive center of faith is realized. Particular duties for this position would be to create and lead a racial justice and inclusion committee. What would they do? They would audit and monitor Govans' baseline diversities within the staff, within the congregation, our salaries, some things we may be not even thinking about. They would lead our session to develop and implement policies regarding diversity and inclusion that were just and fair. They would help communicate diversity and inclusion policies clearly, both to the congregation and to our larger community, so we know who we are and the community begins to know who we are. They would develop outreach materials for local immigrants, so in other languages, Spanish and French in particular, which are the predominant languages spoken by immigrants in our community. Beyond the committee work, the Minister of Racial Justice would lead programming addressing internal and external racial justice issues. We've already seen some of these: anti-racist study groups, African American Affinity Group, educational events of other kinds, neighborhood programming. This position would work in a collaborative manner with the associate pastor, who, as you'll hear in a minute, is going to be focused on church growth. And so the Minister for Racial Justice will also be emphasizing membership growth among Black, Indigenous, and people of color in particular. And to participate in worship leadership on Sunday mornings, preaching 3 times a year, doing other leadership once a month. This is critical because representation matters. And if we are going to be a church that's more open and welcoming to people of color, it would help if we didn't always have 2 white guys leading church every Sunday morning, just to say it plainly. Let me say a quick word about that before I go on. So as I said earlier, we're at a time in our nation's history and our church's history when we not only can't turn away from this issue, but we need to be proactive. As we've been learning, it's not enough to be just not racist. We have to be anti-racist. We have to find ways to actively confront and dismantle racism among us and around us, because our silence only communicates our consent. If we are silent about racism and white supremacy, that's the status quo. And so our silence communicates our consent. This position puts our money where our mouth is when it comes to race. Now let's turn to how we would expand Billy's responsibilities. In this proposal, he'd be moving from half-time to full-time. He'd become the associate pastor for church growth and member engagement. He'd keep his current duties as youth and young family person, as Leah would keep her current duties as music director, by the way. The big thing he would add to his responsibilities would be the church growth component. And before we go into the outline, we need to grow. We need to do something different, something outside the box, to use that cliche term, if we're going to grow, because neither Brown or Govans had figured out how to do this effectively. All the usual efforts toward growth, inviting people for a potluck or doing a community fair or trying to be more welcoming in church, all the things that we've always tried had not been working. We need to try some new things. It's true we can play it safe here and don't change anything, don't take a risk. We can just tread water. We've got a great halftime associate, a great music leader, great staff in other areas with Mary Hamlin Spencer and others. So we grow a little, maybe we shrink slowly, but we are dealing with an inertia in our society that's against church growth. And we also have to face some realities, basic realities, like some of our biggest donors, our most financially supportive members, are in their 80s and 90s, and everybody knows that, including them. And everybody wants there to be something beyond in the 20, 30 years to come. We also face a highly mobile society in which really great members that have been here for a long time move away. And then when great members from other places move to Baltimore, they have a gourmet buffet of churches to choose from. We're in a highly competitive market when it comes to recruiting. We can't just tread water. We have to invest in growth. To that end, we would be adding to Billy's job description an emphasis on reaching out to the preschool in our own church. He would have some regular schedule where he'd be on the playground at pickup time to engage children and our families. He'd have some kind of regular time in classrooms and doing extra special assemblies. I would still be engaging in that as well, but he would take a big chunk of that and do much more than I'm able to do. This is one of the outside of the box ones. He would create a church podcast with staff, me, him, other church leaders, and community leaders, where we'd be interviewing community leaders about twice a month on a podcast. Now, this is not just it's so trendy to do a podcast. We have to do a podcast. All the kids are doing podcasts. We've actually really thought about this. And how do we communicate to the larger community who we are as a church? What makes us unique when the community isn't really listening for what a church is doing and what makes a church unique? And that's why we bring the community leaders together with our staff to have these conversations, these interviews that talk about what the leaders are excited about, what they're doing in the community, what they need, what they hope, what their visions are. And then to have this twist of engaging them in a conversation about virtues and values and maybe a Bible story. It's going to be a really interesting kind of, I don't know of anybody else who's doing anything quite like it. So it's going to be really cool. He would also be leading the communications committee to really work on our online presence and our social media marketing, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, website, really right now we've got a great communications committee. He would add an executive level of function to making that as best it can be. And he would continue to do his member engagement work, but with an extra layer of how do we connect visitors to the life of the church? Because we all know that we see visitors come and go regularly. How do we stop that revolving door and get them to stay? Okay, so I know these positions are a big proposal. What I suggested this session is that if we did this, we should commit to 3 years. And then we could evaluate where we were. Of course, we'd evaluate continuously, but after 3 years, we'd have to stop and say, is this working? Metrics would be membership growth, growth in racial diversity and racial justice programming, growth in enthusiasm and community engagement among the congregation. Now, we would not necessarily need to balance the budget after 3 years, and this is going to put us in a deficit. I'll talk about that in a minute. But we would need clear evidence that we were heading in the right direction by the end of 3 years. We'd have to be very thoughtful about that. So what's the bottom line, you might ask? Well, let's see if I can show you some things. The Finance Committee tomorrow night's going to be putting together a long-term and short-term financial report about what this would mean for us. But I can tell you, as watching over the budget for 14 years here, I can tell you some numbers here. It would add about $70,000 a year of cost to cover both positions. It would mean that our 2021 deficit would be about $135,000. That's assuming that giving remains stable. It's also including approximately $20,000 in loss of rental income due to the coronavirus. It also includes a $40,000 deficit that we could be facing if we make no staffing changes, because already Billy's position is a reach for us. So this would be making a further reach. In 2022, our deficit could go down to 115, and this is assuming nothing else good happens, right? But other good things could happen, but assuming nothing good happens, and we're just continuing to struggle, rental income would come back by 2022, and the deficit would be about that. So total deficit, worst case scenario over 4 years, is approximately $400,000. Yikes, right? All those figures are assuming that nothing is working, that nothing we're trying is working right, and we're just losing money, which is possible. You know, that's all. This would be a risk. Okay. So, and what we would not be able to cover with growth and giving and growth in membership, in that money, where would it come from? It would come from our $6.5 million endowment. So take a deep breath. That's a lot of money. But let's look at some of the positives as well. What are some good things that could happen? We could see in 3 years that our congregation would bring in 30 new members over that 3 years. What would that mean for us to have 30 new members in 3 years? What if in that 3 years our congregation began to look more like our neighborhood and the demographics of our neighborhood? What if in that 3 years we attracted members from the preschool who then would engage other preschool families? What if in that 3 years we were having a real meaningful impact on racial justice in our community and our society? Now, of course, there are other variables to consider. I'm going to go ahead and stop my screen share now. There are other variables to consider. Very positive things could happen. Very negative things could happen. It's a risk. It's a leap of faith for sure. What we'd be doing is investing in a vision of the future, but it would be an investment in a good plan with good people that we know. If we don't do it, we're still making a choice with that money. We're saying, no, that money would be better invested in the stock market. We're not going to invest it in this staffing and this growth opportunity for the church. We're going to invest it in the stock market because we feel it's safer there, which is reasonable. But I wonder if it's the most faithful thing we can do considering the gifts God is giving us in this moment. One other concern, and this will be the last point, and then I'm going to start to wrap it up. The session raised this Tuesday night is timing. Is this the best time to act in the middle of a pandemic? Can we justify this kind of investment when so many people are struggling? I would turn that around and say, yeah, this is the best time to start investing in online ministry and more racial justice and diversity programming. On the racial diversity front, we can think about Martin Luther King's words in Letter from a Birmingham Jail, where he's lamenting as white Christian moderates continue to counsel him to wait, to slow down. It's not the right time to do this. It's not the right time to make these changes. We can't be those white moderates anymore. We have an opportunity in this moment to take a bold and entirely reasonable step to invest in greater racial justice and diversity within our community, and we should take it. On the digital ministry and church growth front, they say, what's the best time to plant a tree? The best time to plant a tree is 30 years ago. The second best time to plant a tree is today. It's going to be the same with digital ministry. The world has already gone online, and we were already behind on digital ministry at that moment. The pandemic has given everyone a huge push, including us, and frankly, this is the moment to invest in this way of being the church. Not exclusively being the church online, but even when we do get a vaccine for this, it's not going to go back to just like it was, and we are always going to need a vital online presence. And I'll be very blunt, if we don't, some other church will. The market's wide open at this moment, and this is the moment to invest in a digital presence for our church. This is not a done deal. The session has approved me to share this proposal with you, the congregation. Everybody knows it's just a proposal. We're asking for your feedback. You can give your feedback by filling out an online form, which we will email out to the congregation tomorrow, or you can call the church office and they will take down information on the form over the phone. You can also stay after for adult options today. We're going to have a feedback time immediately afterwards with some Q&A. The session will be deciding this at their October 20th meeting. They need to make this call now as we begin our stewardship season, as we look to a budget for 2021. It's not a done deal, but there is some urgency. This is a strike while the iron's hot kind of moment. We're in a fast changing world, and God has given us some amazing opportunities that won't last forever. Okay, I know I'm going really long. I'm going to quickly connect this to our Bible reading, just one paragraph, I promise, but I'm Presbyterian and I can't help but connect it to the Bible reading. The first Passover that we read about this morning, the first Passover meal, God liberated the Hebrew people from bondage. God did this incredible set of miracles that demonstrated that God was more powerful than Pharaoh and more powerful than any human empire. God gave the people a gift. God opened a door to a new way of life for the people. But the people still had to walk through it. They had to be willing to make some reasonable sacrifices, to sacrifice the lamb, to put the blood on the doorpost. The passage even includes instructions to act urgently, to do this with their shoes on and their loins girded for the journey. Staying where they were would have been safer. They knew they could remain in Egypt indefinitely, but they decided to make the sacrifice and take the risks necessary for a new and better life together. Let us also demonstrate the same boldness and the same faith as we prepare to take our first steps on a new journey of liberation from the confines of where we are, to make sacrifices that we are called to make, to step out on faith toward a new life that is lived according to our highest values and our greatest hopes for the future. Amen.